Is there? Okay. Should we start? Please settle down. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last session, and the session is very important because we would be talking about military lessons of 1971 war. And we have two very eminent panelists. We have General V.K. Ahluwalia, who is also doctorate, and presently he is heading the Center for Land Warfare Studies. Besides that, has been Commander-in-Chief of a Army, served in the AFT, and is known as a well-noted strategic experts. Then we have General Prakash Menon. Again, he retired from the National Defense College as Commandant. Then he served as a military advisor in the National Security Council Secretariat. Presently, he is Director of the Strategic Studies at Taxila and has been a prolific writer and speaker on macro-strategic issues. Now, just to put the subject in perspective, I'll just give you a broad overview of military campaign in 1971. We've gone in bits and pieces about the military operations, but I'll just give you a broad summary. What had happened, that what was the Pakistan's 91 war strategy? They were defensive in the eastern Pakistan. They had occupied a line of forward defensive posture based on the fortresses. But they ignored the bowl of Dhaka, which was the center of gravity, and that was premised on the basis that Indian government would not be interested in for any deep operations. Probably their operations will only be confined to a certain depth so that they are able to capture certain areas and declare a new government. But that proved to be wrong, and they paid for it. In the West, they adhered to an offensive defense, and they launched preemptive offensive operations in Poonch, Cham, and Rajasthan, which was blunted at the very outset in the Battle of Longewal. And they also had undertaken certain operations in Suleiman K. Headwork, Fazilka. But because of India launching an offensive in Shakargarh Bulge, one of their major pincer, which was to come in the area of Fazilka, Ganganagar, it never took off. They also counted on foreign intervention, thinking that the British and Americans will come to their help, and even Chinese come to their help, which never got realized. What was India's broad strategy? India's broad strategy was a preemptive hybrid offensive strategy in East Pakistan. And it was a classic case wherein we had a four-pronged offensive, which has been explained, coupled with a para-drop at Tangel, a heliborne operation at Sylhet, and an amphibious landing at Cox's Bazar. And the biggest force multiplier was Mukti Bani, which fought in the rear areas, and it actually brought about the collapse of Pakistan Army in a record about 10 days' time. Their strategy, as far as West was concerned, they launched this offensive in the area of Poonch, Pakistanis, which was blunted. And we had certain reverses again, like 65 in the Battle of Cham. We would be discussing what lessons we can draw. And we also had certain reverses in Hussainiwala in the Fazilka sector. We also had launched an offensive to preempt their offensive towards Ganganagar and Fazilka. But it again had limited access because our terminal objective there was Pasrur, which was a very important strategic objective, Zafarwal, Pasrur. But we could not go beyond Basantar River where we established a bridgehead because Pakistanis had their defenses in depth and we could not make much headway. We did have limited success in area of Ladakh, Partapur sector, Kargil, where we had essentially gone for improvement of our defensive posture. And finally, what had happened that at the end of the day, at the end of the military campaign, Bangladesh was born. We had 93,000 prisoners in our kitty, but we bartered a huge chunk of territory in the west, about 13,000 square kilometers that we had captured vis-a-vis about 900 kilometers which Pakistanis had captured. So we went for a major barter. Ceasefire line was converted into the LOC. Kashmir problem remained where it is. And from that, what emerged is that there was a very deep sense of revenge which got embedded in the psychology of Pakistan military. And despite, rather than being moderated and being sobered down, that itch for teaching India yet another lesson, it persisted. So with these initial remarks, we'll get on to certain key questions, but we will begin with requesting General Ahluwalia to make his introductory remarks, about 5 minutes, followed by General Menon, who is digitally connected with us. Over to you, sir. Would you like to say something?
Thank you, General Sharma. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My course from the Indian Military Academy has an intense relationship with the 1971 war. We were the gentlemen cadets in the Indian Military Academy throughout 71. Following the war in East Pakistan, whatever was happening in some small measure as gentlemen cadets, at one point of time, in September perhaps, 71, we came to know that our course is going to be commissioned earlier than scheduled. We were commissioned into the army 6 weeks before the scheduled passing out parade. And my course mates, we got commissioned on 14 November 1971, and my course mates were into the battle, both on the Western Front and into the Eastern Front, within 15 days of getting commissioned. And within the next 10 days, we already had 2 of our course mates killed in action. I would say that we have a huge relationship with this war. Coming back to this one proper, on 22nd February, President General Yahya Khan in the GHQ at Rawalpindi, with most of his military commanders, takes a decision that they will not hand over the political power to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League. And he comes on 1st March and announces that the National Assembly is postponed indefinitely. Civil unrest, mass protest, leading to military crackdown on the 25th of March. But the point to remember is where the leadership of Pakistan went wrong, that it was a political problem. It was a case of deprivation, discrimination, injustice, as also socio-economic exclusion, lack of governance. It was not going to be solved by a military solution alone. It required a political solution as well. That was, I think, not being considered at any point of time. I will now come to the point, what was the strategy and where the Pakistani leaders kept thinking. They said, defense of the East lies in the West. What was the meaning? They were meaning that in the East, the East Pakistan, they will have a delay tactics to ensure, carry out aggressive actions, delay the ingress of the Indian Army into East Pakistan, and ensure that Dhaka does not fall in between. The US and the UN forces will intervene, and they would have then attacked on the western side, where they went wrong to say that they would have a decisive victory against India on the Western Front to bargain that. But the point really remained that they went wrong on both the fronts. For any commander to think of his adversary that he is not strong enough, that's one place they went terribly wrong. On the Western side, although we maintained a strategic defensive posture with local offensive actions, we gave them a bloody nose. But for the two places, as already brought out by General Sharma, in Cham, they came in, crossed the Munawar Tawi. I don't know how many of you will be able to imagine that particular sector. So that's one aspect I thought I'd like to make a mention. In August 1971, India, in any case, initially was quite surprised that on 25th of March, there was a military crackdown. Operation Searchlight was launched. We had not expected the event to take place so very quickly. And that point of time, in August 1971, Headquarters Eastern Command issued an operational instruction to say that, of course, the official book says to liberate up to the line Jamna and Meghna on Jamna and Padma on the west, and also along the line, secure line up to Meghna in the east. That was the initial instructions given in August 1971. There were three corps, 2 corps, 33 corps, and 4 corps, along with 101 communication zone, who were given the task to take on the East Pakistan. I would like to make a mention here that many people have asked, why is it that in the initial portion, we never considered Dhaka as an objective? Maybe I think I'll like to make a mention that at that point of time, when situation was not clear, it was absolutely ambiguous, it was confusing, it was uncertain. At the same time, there were regular reinforcement taking place from West Pakistan via Sri Lanka into East Pakistan. There was also the apprehension of China intervening during that period. Also the apprehension that US and China may again move in to prevent any such action to be taken by us, as also whether we had adequate resources to be able to give Dhaka as an objective. Therefore, the initial portion was to secure line up to Jamna and Padma in the west, to be given to 2 corps as also to 33 corps on the west. And the communication zone was to move along Tangel line as 4 corps moved from Sylhet to Chittagong. That was the overall plan, I would say. And also I'd like to make a mention that the task of General Niazi wasn't easy. He had a very difficult task to perform. You have to understand the geographical compulsions that they were away from the main portion, West Pakistan, more than 1,000 miles by land route, and via the Cape of Good Hope, shall I say via Sri Lanka, it was much longer in any case. So geographical compulsions and the military preparedness and the resources available to East Pakistan was another compulsion. So one of the difficult tasks of General Niazi was that Indian Air Force had air superiority in the first 2 days in East Pakistan. Second was the hostile population itself. The population, as also Mukti Bahini, the Mukti Jodhas, done a wonderful job in terms of guerrilla warfare to make their life very difficult. There were disrupted communications, another issue that was actually he was facing. Also, he had lack of armor and adequate amount of firepower to take on. So some of these actually were also the idea of isolation. But they were so far away from any help to come. There was a feeling of isolation amongst the Pakistani soldiers, as Major General Qureshi writes in his book. So I would say that these are some of the areas why Dhaka was not considered. What was the August 1971 operational instruction? It was given out in that official document that I read that possibly this particular operational instruction was deliberately leaked out. As a result of which, General Niazi decided to send out the troops from Dhaka to hold on to the periphery, so as to hold the outer periphery stronger, hold the communication centers as strong points, and have limited people in Dhaka Baul. As a result of which, he actually lost all the reserves that he had. He had very little strike capability with him to reinforce any particular sector. I think with that I will leave for General Prakash Menon to take on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. General Menon, your Opening comments, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me just start off the way General Ahluwalia actually spoke about passing out 15 days earlier from the Indian Military Academy. I passed out in the next course and we passed out 3 months earlier. And my battalion, after 1 year of service, I joined them in Kargil, were guarding POWs in Ramgarh in 1973. And this is what happened. I was on duty, second lieutenant, you're on duty most of the time. At night, I heard a big bang, rushed out, found out that one of our sentries had fallen from the watchtower. Immediately rushed him to the military hospital in Ramgarh. And there, when I got there, I found out that there's one duty officer, a newly commissioned chap, didn't know very much. He himself was in a panic. And I asked him, is there any other doctor? He said, sab chutti par hai. That's all the answer he gave me. And I asked him, is there a surgeon? Because obviously surgery was required. When he said no, I rushed back to the camp because I knew there was a Pakistani surgeon there. I woke the Pakistani surgeon up. He did not hesitate for a moment when I told him that you got to come to the hospital and operate on the soldier. He came with me, operated on the soldier, probably saved his life, and I dropped him back. So that was actually my part of having an engagement with the Pakistanis. So humanities is something which actually stays alive, especially, I suppose, among soldiers, and we heard that in several ways today. So when we talk about military lessons and learning from the war, it is about how are we going to use it for the future? Because at the same time, we are talking that these sort of wars are no longer relevant in the modern environment. So what is the type of lesson which we actually have to learn? But each war has a component which is permanent in the sense that it has a political objective, it has military strategies at play, it has tactical actions. So these domains remain relevant to all types of war. The question is, what did 1971 war, what lessons can we take from it and apply it for the future? And that future itself is unknown because the types of war and the forms of war itself is disputed. We no longer can actually think about, or we shouldn't at this point in time, trying to launch major operations to the capture of POK, as a lot of politicians announced from their perches, because Pakistan is a jihadized state, and capture of territory in a jihadized state would involve actually getting involved in a long-term contingency. So capture of territory itself in a jihadized state, it would be actually not something which. So the lesson we learned probably from Bangladesh is that we had the people on our side. We could go inside a country when the people are on our side. That is the lesson. If the people are not on your side, don't do that. That may not be the best thing to do. So I'm just, while we go ahead of the discussion, I'm just trying to say that we need to be careful of the lessons that we draw from this war. We are the victors, and we should not be blind to the fact that even in victory, there is a lot to learn. And we heard all these speakers today, but there are many things which will remain with us, many things which we can apply, many things which are common because they are common to all wars. So I would think that as we go on to the discussion, we should probably keep it towards the lessons we think are relevant for the future. There are many lessons we learned, but what is relevant for the future? And that is always a challenging task. So I will just start with the initial part, which is this part about political objectives itself. And there is this issue about whether why didn't we actually aim for Dhaka, and why did actually the politicians do what they did? one of the lessons I think, and that's a lesson pertinent to all wars, that I would think that if you read Air Marshal P.C. Lal's book, he complains about how the Air Force was kept away from the higher level discussions, with Manekshaw actually having a lot of conversations with the Prime Minister, but not having the Air and the Naval Chiefs around. And he makes a point. The point is like this, that any war which we fight, before the political objectives are arrived at, the military interaction must be deep, must be firm, and it must be born from that interaction. And if that military interaction would have possibly said that Dhaka is the center of gravity and told the Prime Minister that we could go there, we could get there, maybe then things would have been different. Or in another case, if the Field Marshal at that time, who said we'll have to wait because we don't have the logistics, we are not prepared, but if we had actually done something in May itself, when Pakistani troops were much less in eastern Bangladesh, probably the things would have been different. But these are lessons in terms of what is, you always try and start and try and get to your objective when the enemy is at the weakest, not when it has built up and given him time. So not giving time is also a lesson which we have to learn. Well, there are many other lessons, and I've got only 5 minutes, which I think I've already exceeded. So we'll start with the discussion, and then we can shoot the generals who are sitting on the stage and on the TV screen.
The thread from your comments, we saw, the civil-military fusion was the hallmark of 1971 war. Even though you had a chief who was very independent-minded, and whatever conversation he had with Mrs. Indira Gandhi is on record. Now, why is it that when we knew this was a shining example, that rather than consolidating on this civil-military fusion down the line, why did we drift, General Manon?
Yeah, actually, the point was, don't forget that the what you saw, the upliftment of the military image did not sit well with many quarters of power in Delhi itself, especially in South Block. And the treatment meted out to our Field Marshal itself is a reflection of that particular type of behavior. So it has always been that from that time onwards, there was, I think, an attempt not actually to make this fusion better, but to keep them apart. And I'm afraid the bureaucratic power was trying to arbitrate and push themselves in between. We never saw them in action during all these crises as much as it was what happened afterwards. So if you look at the role of P.N. Haksar or D.P. Dhar, they were the guys who were actually managing the show. They were managing the government of India, whole of government approach. And they were actually interacting very freely with whoever it was. They were not only interacting freely domestically, they were also interacting externally with all other actors at play, especially what was going on in the United Nations. So I think one of the things which they did, and I hope I am wrong, but what I suspect, and that is a personal view, that there was some sort of a deliberate, or was it to keep the military in its place? And therefore, the fact that the military was distant, and the best way to keep military distant from politicians is to whisper in their ear that don't make them too strong, because then they can threaten the country itself. And that's actually been a whisper, which is not done directly. It is always done indirectly. And it happened soon after, I think, the General VK incident. The same thing was actually used to do so. Even when the debate about the Chief of Defence Staff was normally done, there was always a whisper that he'll be too powerful. We can't have a powerful military, not knowing that Chief of Defence Staff would actually have no powers on his own. The existing Chief of Army Staff is the only commander in the world which commands directly the largest military force, more than anybody. Nobody in the world does that. He's the largest guy. In fact, he's the guy who can threaten everybody. So the point is, I think there was, and this is under the, let's say, surface. It is obviously not. But this is the sense I get because of where I was. where I've spent 5 years. I was in an organization called the National Security Council Secretary. That there was always a general attempt to keep the military well at a lower base. They'll call you only when you want them, when you're really required. They will call only one chief. They will not all call three chiefs when actually all the three chiefs should be around. They are selective and all this. Nobody is held responsible for it because it passes off. But that's what it is. And I think things are changing. And that's the best part. So, as far as the lesson is concerned, maybe we are in a better place on that. And this is just a historical process which has taken place. And I must say that my views are purely personal. I know good guys and bad guys like me. I'm a good guy and a bad guy. We can all be both. So I'm not saying that what I suspect is the truth, but there is probably more than a grain of truth in that.
Laluwalia is right from 47, 48, we have had reverses in Cham. It happened in 47, 48, then again it happened in 65. And then I believe we were planning an offensive in Cham with General Manik Shah. You know, he said that you take it off and take a strong forward defensive posture. Why was that dilly-dallying that there was a near repeat of 1965 till the Corps commander and the Army commander intervened and we became more offensive? Would you like to comment on this?
First of all, geographically, we have to understand that Cham is a area which is strategically so very important to India. It is a link that provides from Jammu, it goes right up to Nashera, goes on to Rajouri and on to Poonch. Anyone who interdicts this particular axis, so today we have a alternate axis via Riyasi, but at that point of time, this was the major axis going right up to Poonch, and it was the closest to the ceasefire line, and it became a line of control later. So the point is, it happened in 47 and in 1965, they had a major offensive, particularly, let me give you a historical perspective. While the Operation Gibraltar was launched by Pakistan in 1965, in which a large number of raiders had come across the ceasefire line with a view to carry out an uprising in the valley. This was in the month of August 1965. And we had picked up these raiders who were coming into the valley with a view to cause uprising. And that's the time we had taken, Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri had taken the decision, and we went across to capture Haji Pir Pass. The moment Pakistan realized that we have captured the most strategically important pass, Operation Grand Slam was launched by Pakistan in the area of Cham. They got across, we were not fully prepared at that point of time in Cham. They got across Munawar Tawi and we had fierce battle in that area. Now I agree with you that in 1971, this particular portion of history was well known. And it was quite well known that once again, Pakistan, who had actually thought the defense of the East lies in the West, they had expected that they would like to take on certain areas to have a decisive victory in the Western sector. This is one area they had one complete division lined up, but on our own side, the GOC-10 Dev at that point of time was looking after Akhnur sector, had clearly given out that we would like to take on offensive in that area. And at that point of time, this continued to dilly-dally between the commanders at that point of time. And I'm given to understand as late as end November, there was a consideration that we will maintain an offensive posture in Cham sector. But by about 30th of November, it was given out that we will maintain a defensive posture. Now that's one point I would like to make out which went against the principles of war, the selection and maintenance of aim. Once we had initially decided to have an offensive posture with a view to preempt any offensive action by Pakistan in the sector, we around 30th of November decided to hold a defensive posture in that sector. Once again, they had a major offensive launch in this sector, knowing fully well that there is a strategic line of communication immediately behind the Munawar Tawi. And once again, we found in this particular sector, as the course of war began, This is one area where close air support was actually not provided. And this particular matter actually had to be referred through the Chief of Air Staff to the Prime Minister on the second or third day itself. So I would just say that it's just a matter of perception at that point of time. The GOC tentative was emphatical to say that they would like to have an offensive posture, but some consideration by which certain posts, because he had already attacked in Punch, as you mentioned. In this particular side, some of the forces were moved away toward the northern direction. So I suppose that must have been the reason why they decided to change the strategy from an offensive in the Akhnur sector to a defensive posture.
Thank you, sir. And my question to General Menon is again, the Battle of Sialkot. We saw some of the most brilliant action in this 3 grenadiers, 17 Pune horse. Why we couldn't even reach even somewhere, even the midway of our terminal objectives? What went wrong? Why was there a lack of punch in our offensive into Sialkot and Shakargarh Bulge? General Menon?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I don't think we can draw lessons by looking at the 97 war in terms of these battles. Because I think what we need to do is to look at the larger issues which are at play. And let me give you an example of what I'm saying. And if you don't mind, I'm not answering your question now. One of the things which stare us in our face when these people were recounting all their experiences of what happened in Bangladesh and so on, is the fact that eventually battles and tactical actions and even at the strategic level are mind games between opposing forces. Eventually, military force application has to affect the mind of the other person. It is when that mind changes that he either gives up or he is determined to fight more, and you change his behavior. So the mind game which came out in 1971 war was, especially in Bangladesh, wherever they felt they were outnumbered, didn't have a chance, was sufficient enough for them not to fight. This is a great lesson for all military leaders. It is not about busting tanks and actually capturing soldiers and prisoners of war. It is about how do you influence his will. And that is a mind game. And that will endure through all types of force which you use. You might claim that you have carried out a lot of destruction today by air power or whatever power that you want to use. How has it affected the mind of the politician and the leadership on the other side? The military leadership is what matters. That is the lesson which we have to carry. That is what matters. If you have to look at all these small battles, what happened in Sialkot, there will be no lessons except for what is actually this thing about the tactical level thing, which are not applicable today for what the future is. So, Chair, if you don't mind, I don't think we should actually look at the smaller part. And if you are with me, let me go on to another. If you're in agreement, can I go to another aspect also? I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yes. So what I'm saying, let me ask a follow-up question now, okay, which is at a macro level.
Answer this little. Let me answer that question of yours.
Okay. General Ahluwalia.
Now, the point is, while we must draw lessons, some of these also emerge from some of the operations that we have conducted. The question that he posed was about the Shakargarh Bulge. What again I would like to say, all those of us who actually want to look at the geography, from Pathankot to Jammu, on that stretch towards Samba, once again we are so very close to the National Highway 1 Alpha, in the Shakargarh Bulge. Again, this is one area Pakistan has always tried to interdict. And with the result, what actually happened was that one corps, which is the strike corps, unfortunately, I would say, was given first a defensive role, which actually should have been an offensive role given to them. with the 3 divisions available to him or available to one corps, they actually had a defensive role as well. With the result, while they were following the movement of the one corps of the Pakistanis, they actually remained very cautious in deploying and employing in the offensive operations. As a result of which, the only offensive went not more than 15 to 20 kilometers because of a very cautious approach. So once again, it gives a lesson that while we must protect and safeguard our lines of communications, which are so very important, which will also be important in the future conflicts. But once we have taken a decision to take on an offensive, selection of aim has been made and we have looked at an objective, then we must ensure that we actually put all the concentration of forces to try and achieve that objective. It's not that we don't draw a lesson from this particular operation. It was a case where we actually were dilly-dallying to say whether it should be defensive or offensive. And when we took the offensive, it was a very, very cautious move. We lost an opportunity.
Thank you, sir. I think the whole thing is about the military lessons. But let me elevate this question little at a higher level. There is a view that after the collapse of Pakistan in East Pakistan, we had a window of opportunity to sort of push the pedal towards West Pakistan and probably force a solution on Pakistan. And there are also documents which say that probably Soviet Union had dictated to us that after the collapse of East Pakistan, you will not do anything to break up Pakistan in the West or to alter the status quo in Jammu and Kashmir. What are your comments on this, General Menon?
Yeah, actually, I think Srinath Raghavan in the book which he writes, A Wonderful History of 1970 World War, covers this aspect very well. So let me just recount the main issues. Firstly, the Americans got an intelligence report that Indira Gandhi actually wants to dismember Pakistan. That's what she's going to do in the process. And they believed that for quite some time. But that was actually not, obviously not factual. In fact, Indira Gandhi herself later on said that we had no such plans and there were some leakages of documents and so on, which she said nothing of the sort was ever planned. So there was nothing which was planned at that time. The fact that we could have gone on the offensive in Pakistan, I mean, I fail to understand that how could you, when you talk about going on the offensive in Pakistan, destroying their armed forces, capturing a lot of territory, what about the people of Pakistan? Are they going to sit back and actually just allow us to go and take over their territory? Or are we going to fight a counterinsurgency there for the rest of our lives? I mean, have we not considered that issue at all? And I don't think any Indian political leader has thought about using military force to actually capture Pakistan. I think that is only the rhetoric of politicians once in a while which comes out. So this idea that we could have gone and done more towards the West, don't forget the entire planning was founded on the fact that the UN Security Council, the big powers of the world, were breathing down our necks, both of Pakistan and India, including the US and including the Russians. So the question whether we should have gone there, and once even the fact that the Americans prodded the Chinese to actually open the front. I mean, they did their best. The Chinese refused. And for whatever it was, although we had taken whatever precautions we could. So this idea that India believes that it can use military force to actually bring about the demise of Pakistan is only political rhetoric. It does not exist in political reality nor in the military reality. If it exists in the military reality, it's purely a military imagination. After all, a lot of people now believe that India is about to can take over POK and should do it. And those are things which actually don't pass the test of reality because we got other things to do, certainly.
Get back to one more question to you, but after I have spoken to General Ahluwalia. Now, from your study of 1971 war, are there any other lessons in terms of military intelligence, in terms of leadership, in terms of, the art of warfare that you would like to share with our audience?
Let me first take on leadership. I won't speak about Field Marshal or General Sagat Singh or General Jacob or General Arora, but I want to speak first about the Pakistani leadership. Shall I say, when on 22nd February 1971, President General Yahya Khan makes a decision, he takes a decision that we will not hand over the political power to Awami League, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He perhaps did not have the idea as to what kind of situation that prevailed in East Pakistan at that point of time. Mere announcement on 1st March that the indefinite postponement of the National Assembly was not going to help. That means the vision of the leadership in Pakistan wasn't, I would say that they just could not fathom the kind of aspirations and the mood of the people's power, I would say. East Pakistan, the power of the people was not really visualized by the leaders. Then Tika Khan, around the same time, February, March, he makes a statement which came into the books, and he says, and I quote, "Give me just 3 weeks, just give me a week, I will bring normalcy in East Pakistan," unquote. Now, that is the kind of a situation you find that they just could not read the situation that was existing in East Pakistan. That is first. So I would say, I wouldn't like to speak about Field Marshal, is already very well known that he had the vision. By April, when he was called by the Cabinet Committee, he had made a commitment to the Cabinet Committee at that point of time that he would require minimum 6 to 8 months for any operation to be conducted, based on the fact what was actually happening opposite China, what was actually going to be the case during the monsoon in the riverine terrain, how much time would require for him to mobilize his formations. So I would say that he had the vision and he was able to bring out all that to the Cabinet Committee, which was actually rightly, I would say, accepted. In fact, I would say one of the very major lessons of this one was that we had political, diplomatic and military all working in tandem. When I say political, I also mean the bureaucracy. They all were working together. So leadership, I would say, there was wonderful leadership from General Sagat Singh. In the absence of orders, he had no orders to move to Dhaka, but in the absence of orders, he had taken actions to go across the Meghna with the helicopters, as also the para-drop of airborne operations in Tangail. These, I think, were wonderful qualities of leaders that we have seen at that point of time. Also, I will make a mention about the intelligence, let me say. I'm not saying that only General Sagat Singh was the one responsible. Even General Nagra, who was the GOC of the 101 communication zone, with so very limited resources, he had moved in the funnel of Jamna and Meghna. And he moved right up to, in fact, you'll be surprised to know that his troops reached Dhaka the first, without having much resources at that point of time. So there has been wonderful leadership in which they had been able to foresee the very fact, the manner in which, if you realize now, 2 corps was being moved from southwestern portion towards Jessore. You had 33 corps moving from northwest towards Bogra and Rangpur. You had the 101 communication zone coming between the funnel of these 2 major rivers towards Tangail. And in the 4 corps in the east, you had 3 simultaneous operations taking place from Sylhet right up to Chittagong. I think, the strategy that the leadership adopted between Field Marshal Manekshaw and Eastern Command and the Director General of the Military Operations was amazing. Now talking about intelligence. Colin Powell, he makes a mention that any intelligence between 40 to 70% should be enough to launch an operation. Even when the Americans went in for Osama bin Laden on 1st May 2011, you found that the last statement made by President Barack Obama was that our intelligence is just 50-50. That means they went in for the Operation Neptune Sphere to get Osama bin Laden with 50-50 intelligence. Therefore, to try and get cut and dry intelligence up to 100% will never be possible. I think it is good to get as much as possible, say 50 to 70% of intelligence, thereafter join the dots, fill in the gaps, and decision must be taken. There's some of the qualities which I think our leaders did with the help of, I would say that this is one area, not only the BSF, the Mukti Bahani, who had thorough knowledge of the terrain, of the new features that have come up, as also the deployment of the Pakistani in East Pakistan, they were a great help. So I think these two aspects of leadership, not able to see beyond the horizon as to what kind of popular support exists, as also how much can they achieve. They were working against a very adverse conditions. So these two aspects, as you mentioned, I'd like to make a mention about one more aspect, is about the flexibility. While I made a mention that in August 71 operation instructions, the aim was only to secure up to a particular line. But the moment they realized that they were getting success and to maintain the memento of operations, they were flexible to say we will now move to Dhaka. And that's what exactly they did. They were fully aware of the fact that the US had already moved the 7th Fleet, US enterprise into the Bay of Bengal. There was an exercise being conducted by CENTO in the Arabian Sea, northern portion of Arabian Sea. Our leaders were fully aware of this fact that the window is very short, and that before the US intervenes or China intervenes, we have to do this particular operation. In 13 days, it was all done. I think we must give it to the quality of leadership that we have had. It's not only the military leadership, you have to also grant to the political leadership, also to the diplomats who worked on ground to try and get that kind of support. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. I just want to briefly add one leader who was from my regiment, Brigadier Sant Singh, who was, in the forefront actually in this 101 communication zone. And he got MVC bar in the Battle of OP Hill when he was the CO. He got MVC and then he got MVC bar because the kind of leadership he was operating with Mukti Bani that he displayed was remarkable. Another thing that we'd got to draw a lesson that RNAW did a wonderful job, and probably that was the sting that we lost over the years for whatever reason. And if given, well, an intelligence agency can really do a wonderful job. And I think this is again, we need to focus on non-contact, non-kinetic warfare capability. Another important lesson is that even that point in time, our operational intelligence was weak on the western side. Till the very end of war, we were not very sure till the application of 7 infantry division and 1 armored division of our adversary. We kept guessing where they actually are. And this weakness manifested subsequently in Kargil war. And even I would say to the extent of a recent standoff that we had with the Chinese. I think that one major lesson we need to draw is to whip up our intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance.
You can just give me 1 minute to say that there's a great difference between the intelligence that we had on the western sector and the eastern sector. In the western sector, our information was quite scanty. Just as you mentioned about 7 DIV, it was called the ghost division because it was never known. 1 armored DIV was only known to us, the location was known after 10th December. But what I want to say is in the western sector, Colonel Sajjad is here, East Bengal Rifles, East Pakistan Rifles, the officers from the men from the East Pakistan, they were actually segregated. And they actually moved across the border, and lot of information. He himself had given many information, whatever they knew, but not of the hot war deployment. In the case of East Pakistan, Mukti Bahani had huge amount of information. The locals, we got huge amount of information, lot of support from them, and we were we knew much more, including with the signal intelligence in East Pakistan than in West Pakistan.
Thank you, sir. And sir, my question to General Manon is, you very rightly, been highlighting that we should actually be looking towards future wars and the lessons that we can draw from 71 operations. Now, if we look at future wars, I think technology is going to play a very, very important role. And some of the lessons of 71 war may not be actually applicable. What is the kind of war that you visualize we fighting against Pakistan And how do we prepare for that? Over to you.
You know, actually, you raised a very, very important question, and I think, the general idea now is that technology is the one which wins wars. And I think we must disabuse ourselves of that notion itself, that technology does not win wars. It is fighting spirit that does. That is finally what matters. Because if technology was to win wars, then Americans wouldn't have had the type of tail under their legs and left Afghanistan the way it was. I mean, they had complete domination of everything which technology could make, they had complete command of the sky. So, this notion that technology is going to win wars is gaining ground, but I think you should be careful about that. Technology is an enabler. Wars are won by human agency, by the quality of its leadership, by the fighting spirit of its formations. And that is what is always important. That is the lesson we must take away from 71. Not that technology has now superseded this. This will remain the winning factor. Technology will make it, will be, but don't forget, technology is contestable. You can develop what sort of technology that you want. The other guy can do the same. And he can actually counter you, he can deceive you, he can do so many things. So while the blowing wind is in favor of technology, and I would agree, because the technology is making all the difference in the way we fight wars, it does not make the difference in what is war winning. That is a different cup of tea. And that battles itself is different from actually war. So I think we have to be careful of the lessons that we draw. And I think one of the things which we need to understand, and I take it from what General Ahluwalia, one of the lessons which we need importantly is that the land formation which must do the fighting is the core. That should be where we should, even in our theater commands, we only need command where it is a functional command. We do, as far as war fighting capability is concerned, it must rest with the corps commander. He's got the greatest orchestra of war under him. It's also possible to give him resources. He's the man, and he should be, and that's the lesson 91, he should be given freedom of action as long as you lay down the red lines. I mean, General Sagat Singh's actions were same. And let me tell you, in most wars, even with the wars which have taken place after this, military commanders, when they see an opportunity and they find that it does not actually fit within the orders that they receive, they're well within their rights to actually do it, as long as the objective is achieved, as long as it furthers the political objective. And I think our military commanders, our corps commanders, must be very carefully selected, because they are going to be the one, as far as land warfare is concerned, which is going to make the difference. And if you don't give them the freedom of action, then you're tying their hands, because he's the man on the spot. He knows everything. The guys in Delhi and the guys in the MO directorate can say what they want. And I think one of the lessons which came from Ladakh was this. They started at least referring to the guy there sitting on the ground and not making decisions which he had to implement when he was not consulted. So I think the greater lesson here is that the Indian army itself must base their fighting capabilities in corps. And they should be directly under their theater commanders. And that should be a great lesson for the next thing. As far as intelligence is concerned, the lesson is there will always be failure of intelligence. We must be prepared for it. You do what you want. We must always improve intelligence. All wars, we have the same problem. What is important is when that failure happens, how do we react? So we plan for failure of intelligence. That is the lesson. You can say that we will improve our intelligence. Intelligence, I'm afraid, cannot overcome the friction of military action. Clausewitz cannot be just ruled out. He's always there, because he can deceive you. He can pass you signals. He can blind you today. He can do so many things, and you can have all the things in the world, and yet your intelligence might fail. You should be prepared for that. It is not that you only improve your intelligence capability, but military commanders on the ground, the guys who have to do the fighting, the guys who have to plan, must plan for failure of intelligence. That is the lesson.
I agree with General Prakash. I like to make a mention that the modern wars are not, the armed forces do not go to war. Nations go to war. That's the first part. Second part, in our context, on our Indian subcontinent, we must not forget the fact that we have two neighbors with whom we have unsettled borders, disputed borders. And therefore, all the three countries, China, India, Pakistan, work on the philosophy not to lose an inch of territory. So therefore, we have to understand that our philosophy remains not to lose an inch of territory. Boots on the ground will continue to remain important till such time that we really have technology-enabled system coming in a very big way. Also, the fact in the modern warfare is going to be a multi-domain operations, not the just traditional land, sea, and air. It's going to be cyber, space, information warfare, psychological warfare, propaganda. Also, we'll be operating in an electromagnetic spectrum. Also, the requirement, as we have learned also from the, let's say, 71 war and the 99 conflict, is that there is an integration required between all the three services and the other elements of national power, which actually means we require a unity of command which leads to unity of purpose or unity of effort, which means synergizing the effort of the elements of all the three services to achieve the objective. This is one more aspect I'm saying, beside the multi-domain operations, there is a requirement to integrate. And something that is coming out and we have been discussing now is about theaterized command, just as China has already done it since February 2016, that need for having a theaterized command so that you are able to have unity of command and unity of effort. And third part I would make a mention is that we need to ensure that these efforts towards intelligence, they must get coordinated. That's a very important portion as we move along.
Thank you. I think General Ahluwalia has really summed it up, and General Menon has raised very, very pertinent point that we must reflect upon. With this, I come to an end of this session. If there are any intervention or with the permission of Dr. Sanjeev Chopra, we can have those interventions and request for the response from our panelists. Well, yes, I'll just come to you. Yes.
We have forgotten one thing, character. Most important thing in the battlefield is character. Let me commend Indian soldiers. Lakhs of soldiers have went into Bangladesh. Not a single case of rape. Only one army in the world. They can be charged for anything, and not a single murder.
Not a single?
Not
Murder.
a single murder. Soldiers, they are isolated from family. Physical need, the control. This is the finest award of India. Number two, when Colonel Himmat Singh and General Arora goes to Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib and said, "Sir, would you come for our farewell parade?" He said, "Of course." Which regiment? The 4 guards. I will come before time. To the 4 guards, Ashok Tara saved his family. If 4 guards didn't take that action on 18th December morning, then Bangladesh history would be different. Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib's entire family, including present Prime Minister, would have been slaughtered. And Bangabandhu would have died. Another. This character is so important. That's the reason this is the only army in the world, after occupying a country or winning a victory, has gone back within 3 months without any stigma. That's very important. Next thing, sir. We are all discussing things, but we forgot one thing. Mrs. Indira Gandhi knew too much. I've been studying in America, and I'm a member of the Congress Library. Archer Blood's son is my friend. He was the chief of the library, so I have access to many documents, which helps me actually. Peter Blood. 2 senators, bipartisan, Saxby, Senator Charles. They made a resolution for putting arms embargo of America to this state. That's the reason Kissinger adopted another tactic. He convinced Iran and Saudi Arabia and Jordan to send weapons. Actually, some weapons were sent, aircrafts were sent, missile boats were sent. But what happened? A massive fleet of support was going out of Boston Bay. Would you believe? 10,000 boats, all students. Boston is a young man's city. They all blocked the thing and they didn't come out from there. One of the officers who would later on become a colonel, he was in that boat and he put me the side. The Americans couldn't do much about that. So anyway, sir, we haven't discussed one thing very important. The failures or the mistakes of Indian Army. We never discuss about it. If you want, I can tell the point. That's my study of my subject. Number one, sir. Only one amphibious landing. I feel very sorry for all the Gorkha boys, all drowned. What a tragedy. No reconnaissance. No shore fragments being sent, check the water level, nothing. And why who gave the information that Pakistan army is running away to Burma? Nobody is going to Burma. They are preparing to surrender. You unnecessarily killed your people. Number two, sir. You had total air superiority from 9th onwards. Most of the helicopters, they took off and they landed, including one of General Abdul Rahim. How did the helicopters go? Total air superiority. And you had total blockade. How does BNH Rajshahi, the frigate, with their Commander Gulzarin, all troops ran away, reported to Malaysia. These mistakes should be really taken care of. And of course, some of the battles where we had unnecessary casualties would always be bypassed. Those fortifications, like, why did you give so much of blood for healing? You could have just bypassed. No ego in that battle. Why we give the 8 guards? How much casualties there? Sir, I have carried Indian dead on my shoulder. Many. I can name some. And I have carried so many Indian bodies because after 21st November, I was attached to Indian battalions because I knew about the terrain and I was very good in map reading. And the commanders loved to have me around. So I've seen the sacrifices. But then there was no complaint that we are dying in so many numbers. One Indian officer told me that a Pakistani brigadier told him that the Pakistani soldiers and Indian officers made the best army in the world. But I'm not cared about that. Brigadier Salimullah, my commander, told me before being taken away as a POW. I helped him because he wanted to say his prayer. And he requested me to be on guard. He thought anybody could shoot him. He told me terrific things. Most of his soldiers became drug addicts. You never mix up militia with your regular troops. Militias are all Jhelum Rangers, Ravi Rangers, they are all drug addicts. And they were passing drugs to and they are not taking orders. They lost their command and control. But then that's also character. So what we should do, sir, people like you in research, please evaluate the mistakes of 71. Because we are all prone to mistakes. And most imperfect animal in the world is human being. So let's jot down how many mistakes we made. So that in case of a future war, same mistakes are not made. But only one thing. You are the most battle-inoculated army in the whole world. No army has shed so much of blood. No army has fought so many cannons. So this sacrificing tendency in the soldiers and officers to be done. I still feel the best bit of the soldiers, and Cardozo is here, are the company commanders, because I saw them. Every company was being led by their officers. Nobody was sitting in the command post, and I have even seen them leading to the point platoon, point section. And that's the reason the charge goes on. So it's going to go on beyond you and me. Maybe someday your children will fight in the war, and my children will be supporting them anyway. The good parts should be cultured much more. You don't fight with your weapon, fight with your heart. And that heart should be strengthened. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for raising some very, very pertinent points, and I think we will take note of it here in USI and General Pannu. And incidentally, both our sons are soldiers, General Ahluwalia and my son, and they're both course mates. And that brings me, yeah, you had an intervention.
No, I don't have an intervention, but I think this was the most fascinating. And I just want to ask.
Keep it closer.
Sir,
Please, mic
Judge
closer.
Menon, sir, can you hear him?
No, I cannot.
Can you hear me,
Okay,
sir?
I'll repeat the question. Yes.
Okay. So, I have some interest in this battle, which I really think was one of the most important battles in the history of warfare. And my area of interest is in the eastern sector and particularly Forco. The dots I'm unable to join is this, that everyone says that Sagat's remit was not Dhaka, but neutralizing east of the Meghna, right from Sylhet to Kumilla to Chittagong. But three things happen. One is on the 29th, he tells Shami Mehta that you will not go to Kumilla, but you'll participate in the Battle of Bakhora and then go down with the 4 guards. This is the first thing. The second is that on the 7th and 8th, he gives instructions to the 110 helicopter unit to heli-lift the Gurkhas into Sylhet. On the 8th morning, Yensa was heli-lifted. On the 9th morning, he decides to heli-lift the entire brigade, 311, across the Meghna. Now the heli-lift happens outside through the Brahmanbadia football stadium. And the 4 guards are called at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and said that you're being heli-lifted. Till then, they don't know. And in the morning, they've done their recce. And then he hands out maps of what is there from Raipura and Narsingdeen to Demra and Dhaka. So you think Sagat knew that he's going to cross over to Dhaka, and that was between him and maybe Inder Gill and the chief? This is something which I find, he got the maps printed, and I found out sometime in the month of June or July out of Dehradun. It's not possible that the corps commander is asking for maps and it won't be found out. It's quite interesting. I mean, he had just thought this whole thing through. And that story, unless you hear it from, I've spoken to the Air Force officers, I've seen their flight logs of 110, and he has been working with them in the in Meghalaya and so on, and he asks them to this squadron leader Charanjit Sandhu, who is the CEO of he tells them to practice heli landing at night and so on. So I think it's a brilliant move. All said and done, he's just an outstanding field commander, as Sir said. But you think he knew? Or he had planned? This is not there. You run into a wall with everyone, including General Randhir Singh, who's written his biography.
Yes.
You just run into a wall, but you've been an army commander. You think he knew?
I'll
I don't
just
know.
update General
Okay, ask the
Menon
question.
also.
Yeah.
No, he's not getting the
No,
question.
I've understood it, but I think the question is out of syllabus of the military lessons of 71 war, because you're trying to reach facts about Sagat Singh's knowledge. So I think that would probably.
The question is that there is, in fact, we don't want to get into this debate because about Dhaka being the terminal objective, on one hand, I think it's documented that the liberation of whole Bangladesh was the ultimate objective given, and that was very much there in the mind of, Field Marshal Manik Shah, even Indira Gandhi. That's how you would have probably, but they thought it would be more practical to have the initial objective up to the line of three rivers, and based on how the situation developed, then they can review the whole, the military plans and go for terminal objective as Dhaka. But it was already there in the top, in the minds of the top military leadership, including General Sagat Singh, because the moment, he was poised to cross Meghna, he just declared for himself without awaiting instructions from top that my next objective is now Dhaka, and that is how he went for that Haliborn operations in Sylhet. Now, rest is in the realm of conjectures, whether he knew in August, May, June. That I think is very difficult for us to get an empirical basis to prove or disprove that. So with this, I
May
think,
just say?
yes, sir.
Your point is very correct that Sagat Singh had made the people practice for heli landing by getting batteries from Calcutta, which is given in one of the books. But the fact is, one very important factor amongst the commanders is intuition. Intuition is a very important factor among the commanders. When he ordered for a brigade to be heli-lifted across the Meghna, he had already had information about the Pakistan soldiers withdrawing from the town called Bazar. I know what the... Bhaul Bazar, correct. So when he got that information that they were moving back from the Bazar, that's the time he realized it is now feasible for him to pick up with the helicopters and take that. As regards Major Shami Mehta at that point of time, he was with PT-76 Squadron, and they could float across the river. They took that chance, and they did a wonderful job. So I think beside professional knowledge, professional competence, experience, intuition of commanders at the site is also a very important portion. I think Sagat Singh had that intuition with him to take on these kind of, and every commander must do when he's on the ground.
Okay. Okay.
He had an alternate plan that we forget.
Group Captain Chandan Singh was the...
Now, simultaneously, he ordered 19 Punjab to cross the river, and they had no crafts, nothing. 400 boatmen with Mukti Bahini under firing of the Pakistanis crossed the river. That's a great crossing we always forget.
Great.
Assault, and then he was talking to his commander, General Gonzalez, 19 Punjab CU, I forgot his name, saying, "Sir, this is the first assault river crossing under enemy fire done on a country boat. Fisherman's boat and country boat crossed a full battalion. So Sagat, other than helicopter, if it had failed, he had a battalion to follow up.
Follow.
So he always had alternate plan.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of a fascinating session, and I would request the final word if General Cardozo would like to say anything, because I think it's in the fitness of thing that we
In fact, I was also going to recommend that.
Yes.
Honestly, I was going to recommend that
no.
because he's written a chapter for us in our
Yes.
book in
Yes.
clause.
Yes, sir.
I'm glad you mentioned my book because whatever has been discussed today and hopefully tomorrow, it's in that book, but the book is nowhere today here. Anyway, the first thing I'd like to say is, as far as intelligence goes, we need to give credit to General Jacob for intelligence interception. At the tactical level, yes, we had information, but at the strategic level, he intercepted communication, radio communication between Dhaka and Karachi of the Navy, and he broke the naval code. And now he knew exactly what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen. And all this was given to Army Headquarters. So we knew all the plans of Pakistan in advance. Of course, this may never happen again. The other thing I'd like to say is, as far as the 1971 war is concerned, most of these factors can never be replicated. But there was total cooperation and convergence between the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. There were hiccups, like the Navy went to Karachi without air support, but they both bombed the same target at Kiamari oil fields. But total cooperation and coordination, Army, Navy, Air Force. Secondly, synergy between the armed forces, between the politicians, and the bureaucrats was total. As you know, Ian Huxer and but when it came to the negotiation at Shimla, the armed forces were left out. What we won on the battlefield, we lost with the negotiating team. Thirdly, the guerrilla warfare by the Mukti Bahini demoralized Pakistan, and they did a fantastic job. Fourthly, we had the support of the local population. And lastly, but not to be forgotten, is the
Yeah, I've got unstable internet. I think I can't hear otherwise. I put off my video.
firstly
Hello.
the
Sir? Hello.
Hello,
is that
Prakash? Is that
Jan
Prakash?
Menon, sir?
Sorry. I put off my video because my internet is unstable.
Okay, right. So I thought you have already logged off. No, good that you're there, sir.
I wouldn't do that to you, would I?
Never know, sir, you're the council member.
Don't trust us anymore.
yeah, what
Yes, sir.
what Sajid was saying is very important.
Sir.
But the last point about what happened in 71 is the total air superiority in the beginning of the war. The army was able to do river crossing operations, airborne operations, para operations, of course the failed amphibious operation, because we had total air superiority. Tangail, unfortunately, if you remember correctly, second para was dropped on the 10th of December. It was supposed to link up with 101 Com Zone and Tiger Siddiqui's force of 3,000. It never happened. So what it actually achieved was psychological. Because again, the British BBC said when they saw paratroopers at Dum Dum Airport, they asked Jacob, is it a para brigade? He very cleverly said,
Yes.
I won't tell you. It's up to you. I can't tell you, but it's up to you. So they presumed that it was a para brigade. It was only a para battalion. But when Niazi saw guys full of second para dropping down, he was visibly shaken. And lastly, what everybody is talking about, mind over matter, two things happened. There was the civil government and the military government, both of Pakistan, trying to negotiate for a ceasefire. What happened? As far as the Niazi was concerned, he was determined it's going to be a ceasefire. But Jacob went without any weapon, just the article of surrender, and cut a long story short. Finally, when he was not agreeing, he told him, I am not going to be responsible for what happens to you and your forces, because if you don't surrender, the problem will be yours. The Mukti Bahini and the citizens of civil population is paying for your blood. It's your choice. It's your call. So he had to surrender. As far as the civil government was concerned, again, intelligence, thanks to Jacob and to basically Jacob, we learned that Governor Malik was going to have a conference in Governor's House at 12 o'clock on the 15th of December. This was relayed to Shillong, and the Air Force at Gumigram and Guwahati was sent. They zeroed in on the conference room just 5 minutes before the conference started. The governor gave up and signed surrender. These are the things which I think could also be said. And I think we've learned a lot. This is a wonderful event organized by Valley of Words and USI. I think we've learned a lot. I learned a lot of things which I didn't know before. God bless you both. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Sanjeev, can I just leave a small note before we break off? I began with my course. I want to just narrate about one second Lieutenant Arun Patole from Pune. He joined on the Eastern Theatre. Within the first 5 days during the patrolling, he got 3 bullets on his shoulder and on the left side. He was being evacuated and he realized that he's not going to survive. And in that subconscious mind, he says, and I quote, "Please tell my mother I fought well. Please tell my mother I fought well." Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think, I just read that one of the reasons for why we went for 1974 implosion was because Americans started, the saber rattling. They brought this aircraft carrier, which was with the
Enterprise.
nuclear weapons, and that was a wake-up call that India will not be subjected to such kind of a nuclear coercion. So with this, I thank General Menon, General Ahluwalia, my seniors in the army, and the beautiful audience here, and General Cardozo for those very, very remarkable comments, and particularly Colonel Sajid, who's always been dropping pearls of wisdom and enlightening us with this vast operational experience. And we look forward to your continued association with Valley of Words and with the USI. So with these words, we can just close this session. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.